This session will be split somehow. The timetable is not very trivial. So right now we'll have a first talk of the session, then we'll break for lunch or late coffee break for those who are in more Western time zones, further west from Moscow. Anyway, right now we're happy to be able to listen to Nicola Laflorensi from Toulouse, well, actually from San Sebastian as well, who is going to tell us about classical quantum computers and disordered problems. So Nicola, please.
Thank you, Evgeny. Thanks a lot for this kind invitation. Yes, indeed, I will talk about quantum disordered problems, and of course, yeah, this title is a bit like funny because of course I'm not using quantum computers yet, and everything I'm going to tell has been performed on what we call still classical computers, like regular computers, and in particular big machines, supercomputers. Anyway, so here is the outline of what I'm going to tell today. So first of all, I don't know about the audience. If the audience is familiar with condensed matter and these other problems, I will give a brief introduction to that, and then gently move to Anderson localization, to many-body localization. Then I will give a sort of overview of what has been done during the past 10 years in this highly debated field of many-body localization. And then, okay, depending on the time, I will now then jump to my own results, numerics on the specific problem, which is now recognized as the sort of standard model for many-body localization, one of the simplest one, which is the Heisenberg chain in a random magnetic field. And then I will conclude and give some perspectives. So first of all, let me acknowledge my collaborators on this problem. Two postdocs during this period, like David Luiz, who started this investigation with us, with the Fabiale as well, permanent in Toulouse, like me. And more recently, Nicolas Massé was also a postdoc in Toulouse, working with the Fabien and also with Gabriel Marié, who is now in between Toulouse and Singapore. So what is condensed matter physics? So for those who don't really know what it is, so we are talking about macroscopic physical systems, okay? Condensed in the sense that we talk about solids or liquids, where importantly, interactions can be strong between the constituents of the systems. And the basic framework here is quantum mechanics and statistical mechanics, okay? So there are many examples of interesting hard condensed matter systems. Of course, magnets, classical magnets, quantum magnets, conductors, semiconductors. And a good example also of interesting material is graphene. Also more about chemistry. These compounds are called Mott insulator, and they are very interesting for condensed matter physics because they are parent compound of what is called high temperature superconductors. Okay, and also here I show this nice movie of a superfluid, which is also an interesting condensed matter state of matter. So this is, okay, what the framework where we are going to discuss. And then the other ingredient is the disorder. So I will flash rapidly three important examples where disorder play a key role. The simplest one is the electrical resistivity of a simple conductor. So here I show an example of it's a cartoon of an electron going in a metal. So here this is a sort of crystal, sort of lattice with atoms, which doesn't really move, okay? Instead that, except that when temperature is finite, of course, you have the motion of the lattice, the vibrations, which will produce the resistivity Okay, these are the thermal vibration. But when you go to lower temperature, this thermal vibration gets slower and slower, but then defect in impurity, which are sketched here like with the gray or the black circles, okay, these are imperfections, which are always present in any metal. They will play now a role, and because of this defect in impurity, resistivity can saturate even at very low temperature. Okay, so this is a simple example of how the disorder is present on everyday life in all materials. Another maybe a bit more involved example, but this has triggered very, very beautiful physics, is the Kondo effect, which, by the way, gave the Nobel Prize to K.G. Wilson in '82. And so Kondo and Wilson were able to explain why there is a minimum now in the resistivity at low temperature. So as compared to the previous figure, here there is a minimum and then the resistivity goes up again. And so this was explained because of an effective interaction between the conduction electron in the metal with some magnetic impurities, which are always present. So here you see the percentage of the magnetic impurity present in, for example, in copper, in the metallic copper. Okay, so this is a beautiful example of how disorder can have drastic consequences in condensed matter. Another good example also is the metal-insulator transition. Okay, so here I show the very famous Kravchenko experiment curve of the resistivity as a function of temperature. And so you see that there is like a transition between an insulator here on the upper part and the metal. And interestingly, this is in the low, when the density of electron is lower here in this part, that the system becomes insulator. And this is because the effective interaction, because the density is lower, the effective interaction between electrons is weaker. So interestingly, when you increase interaction, you get a transition towards a metal. And so this system is a two-dimensional electron gas, so-called MOSFET system. And here, of course, there is inevitably, there is some residual disorder in this system. So here what you see the interplay between disorder, which is always present, and interaction. And so what we learn from this is that increasing interaction basically helps the delocalization, helps the metallicity of the material. And by the way, these experiments are still not fully understood because the theoretical framework is extremely difficult. This is interacting electrons in 2 dimensions. Okay, so now as a theory, you say, I want to model all these. So, okay, let's do the following. Let's take the Schrödinger equation for n, capital N being large, interacting electrons in a solid. This is okay. Everybody can write this, but the problem is there are so many particles that you will end up like this. It's impossible to solve that for like realistic materials. So we need another ingredient. And so we want to simplify this. And the first thing is, let's go to a lattice, okay? So we discretize basically the real space. And there are several very interesting fundamental lattice models like Hubbard model, okay? Describing electrons with an interaction and a potential moving, for example, on the 2D square lattice. That can also be okay, so if there's a strong magnetic field, for example, we can forget about the spins because all the electrons are polarized, and we go with the spinless fermion model. Okay, this is an example, the so-called TV model, okay, where you have hopping of the electron and an interaction V between, for example, nearest neighbor. Of course, to address this kind of lattice model, a good tool would be numerics. And here I show an example of a supercomputer on which we are going to run some exact organization or Monte Carlo or TMRG codes to try to understand better the physics of this problem. So let me now be a bit more specific and with a very simple model, okay? But even though simple, but hosting very non-trivial physics. So this is interacting electrons in one dimension, okay? So as I said before, you have a quantum tunneling term, okay, hopping of electrons from one side to a neighbor, for example, and a short-range interaction here, the V term, and a potential, a local potential, which can also depend on the site, okay, epsilon I. Interestingly, this model, in fact, is some sort of universality because building on some known transformation, like, for example, the Jordan-Wigner transformation, which maps electron with spin 1/2. And this model is equivalent also to a spin 1/2 chain in a magnetic field. Okay, so using this mapping, so all this, so the creation and annihilation operator of fermions map onto a spin 1/2 operator. And this is the exact mapping. So we end up with the so-called XXZ model for spin 1/2 in a magnetic field. So now the local potential of the electron has become a magnetic field. Okay, and so this is, for example, the spin flip term is doing this. Okay, you see you can flip a pair of spin, and this green term is the interaction. Okay, so this model can be first of all understood with some analytical arguments, and in particular if you first put only one particle. What does it mean? So this is the single particle problem. So you forget about the interaction because of course the interaction, this is a pairwise interaction. So when there is only one particle, this is this simple model where you are hopping and a potential here. And a very important result, back to the work of Anderson and others, is that as soon as there is some randomness in this potential epsilon I, you can diagonalize the free fermion, and you will find that this new operator, this new Fermi operator, which are in our combination of the original C operator, are localized in space. So which means that this function phi im, m being the labeling the state, the same m as here, are exponentially localized. Okay, so this is an example like this. So this is a sketch, of course, but this is one state m, which is localized here, another one here, another one here, and so on and so forth. Okay, so at the single particle level, this is what is happening. As soon as you put a disorder here, this is resulting in one dimension. Okay, so now what is going on if you allow many particles? Okay, allowing many particles, that means this term V ni plus 1 cannot be ignored, and working out this Hamiltonian now in the Anderson basis. Okay, so taking back this new Fermi operator B, we end up with this. So this is a diagonal part, non-interacting, and the effect of interaction takes these four. This is a 4 fermion term with a complicated function V, which involve 4 orbitals. And to paraphrase Anderson, who said more is different, not in this context, but in this one, I think this is also valid, that when you have more particles, the situation can be different. Why that? Because as we see here, this interaction will favor the localization, because this can make particle hopping, okay, at any distance. Okay, and this is something which has been understood for decades now. And here I give a list of founding fathers who helped us to understand better this problem. Okay, so on general grounds, based on this kind of argument, we expect that interactions will help delocalization in some sense. So from the Anderson insulator then interaction, we expect that that interaction will delocalize the system. So this is the basic phase diagram we would expect in the plane disorder interaction. There is probably a line like this separating insulator in the presence of interaction, which from Anderson becomes what we call a many-body localized, separated from a delocalized ergodic regime. Okay, so this is what we expect. And indeed, okay, after this, this very important first works, mostly analytical, I would say came the era of numerical simulations on this specific problem. And a very influential paper came in 2010 by Paul and David Hughes, working on this problem, okay? So which is very close to what I said before. So before I discussed TV problem with electron, but I said that using Jordan-Wigner, this is equivalent to spin chain. And so they took a spin chain, a Heisenberg spin chain with a random field, and using simple exact diagonalization on modest system size up to 16, okay, 1/6 sites, they could study the spectral statistics, so very high in the many-body spectrum, and they observe a spectral statistic transition between something which is well described by random matrix theory in the Gaussian orthogonal ensemble and a Poisson statistics at high disorder strength. So they could qualitatively observe a clear transition between two different spectral statistics, and they identified a critical point in this regime here, separating a delocalized from a many-body localized regime. Then came interesting works on dynamics of entanglement in this problem. So this is a good example, this Bardarson, Polman, and Joel Moore. They found that as soon as you put finite, but it maybe could be very small interaction in the problem, instead of having an entanglement entropy as a function of time, which saturate, this is the blue symbols in the case of Anderson. This is zero interaction for the blue. As soon as you put finite but very small, could be 0.01, 0.1, so very small interaction, you now have an unbounded entanglement growth in the MBL. So this is really a smoking gun of interaction. And so this is a very surprising result that as compared to Anderson, where entanglement doesn't grow anymore, this is bounded. In the MBL regime, interaction effect makes the entanglement entropy to grow, but very slowly, logarithmically. You see, this is a log scale here on the x-axis. Okay, so to try to understand better this, came a very interesting analytical work then, and this is a good example by Serbin, Papic, and Abanin, where they show that the MBL problem is in fact equivalent to a sort of classical Hamiltonian like this, but with an infinite expansion, okay? Provided that you make a quasi-local unitary transformation of the original spin degrees of freedom, okay, with this unitary transformation, which is quasi-local, so it's almost, yeah, it's localized, basically. And so using that, you can basically diagonalize exactly your system, writing the MBL Hamiltonian like this, okay? So this is, I think, a tour de force, which was made by these people. Then, okay, we came with our contribution in the Toulouse group with Fabien and David Luiz. We were able to propose a phase diagram in the energy density disorder strength plane. And we show that there is indeed, as Paul and Hughes show, there is an ergodic to MBL transition, but depending on at which energy you are in the many-body spectrum, okay, there is a so-called mobility edge like this. So this is not a straight line like this, but there is like a curvature. And so I will come back to this numerics afterwards, but that was, at that time, we were able to go to up to 22 spin 1 half, which was like not so easy, in fact. Roughly at the same time, there were the first experimental evidence for MBL, or maybe we could call that quasi-MBL, because this is not purely random. So this is an optical lattice experiment in the group of Emmanuel Bloch. And here they show the imbalance as a function of time, which is in a way a measure of how the system keeps memory of an initial pattern. Okay, if you start, for example, from a charge density wave pattern for fermions, like particle hole, particle hole, particle hole, and then you let this evolve, how this pattern is lost or not during time. And so they found that indeed, if the quasi disorder is strong enough, we keep a memory of that. So that was a very, very impressive experiment showing that indeed we can have this physics in presence of interaction. Then in 2016, John Imbrie came with a mathematical proof for the existence of MBL. And for that, so I will not enter into the details, but he basically proved that MBL is a stable phase of matter in the thermodynamic limit for this particular model, which is a modified Ising model in a transverse and longitudinal field with disorder in all components. And more recently, still in the analytical side, I think there is a breakthrough which came with this work of Thierry Uveners, Marcus Müller, and De Reuk, where they show that this MBL to delocalized regime transition is what they call an avalanche transition, where some very small ergodic region can grow indefinitely and basically trigger this avalanche transition. Okay, sort of, it's not like a percolation, but we could think of that like sort of these ergodic bubbles are growing, and then at some point span the full system, making this avalanche scenario for the transition. And this has been followed by several other people. And a direct consequence of this avalanche scenario, for example, is that the transition belongs to the Kosterlitz-Saulis universality class. Okay, so this is basically the landscape of this. Okay, of course, I certainly forgot many very important work in this MBL field, but I believe these are quite important steps during this last 10 years. So let us come back to the specific lattice model, the so-called XXZ model in a random field, which, as I said, is also equivalent to fermions, interacting fermions, and also hardcore bosons in one dimension. So already at zero temperature, okay, so the problem is well understood now at zero temperature, since the pioneer work of Jamarki and Schulz, for example, where here, if you put interaction strength and disorder strength on the vertical axis, it's understood that there is, in most of the phase diagram, there is a localized phase, which is so-called Bose-glass phase, when we think of this problem in terms of hardcore bosons. And the quasi-long range order or superfluid order can survive a little bit at weak disorder here in this region, which is the attractive region. Now we are going to focus on high temperature, high energy, and more specifically on this delta equals 1 point, okay, which is a Heisenberg point. So let us go to high temperature. By the way, this diagram can be studied numerically, and this is something we did with Elmer Dogen a few years ago using GMRG or quantum Monte Carlo, but because this is a zero temperature, so the ground state physics can be approached much more easily using this kind of method like Monte Carlo, GMRG. And a simple reason of that is the finite size gaps. We know that the ground state, the finite size gap close to the ground state is in fact not so small. It scales with the power law, like 1 over L or 1 over L to some power, but it's not so dramatic. But if you go to very high in the spectrum, now the typical gaps scale exponentially with the exponentially small with the system size. So that's why we have some difficulty to do numerics. And this is what I'm going to explain now. Okay, so this is the standard model, this random field Heisenberg chain, okay, that we are going to deal with. Spin 1/2, and so the total spin is conserved, okay, but so we can restrict the study to a given sector, like for example, the largest one, which is the spin total equals 0. But even that, the Hilbert space is exponentially large. It goes roughly like 2, because this is spin half, 2 to the power L, and there is a small reduction because we are in this subsector. But this is, at the end, this is still an exponential growth. And if you now look at the many-body spectrum, this is an example, okay? Exact diagonalization, and you see, so now the spectrum has been put in a box between 0 and 1, okay? So this is a renormalized spectrum, and here you have the ground state at 0, and this is the top state here. And as what I said before, this gap here are quite big, but if this is not what we are interested in for high energy, we want to be here at very high energy, where you see here, the gaps are very, very tiny. So it is difficult then to access. So today, if you want to produce this and to study this problem using a full exact diagonalization, so compute all the eigenstates, eigenenergies, with actual classical resources, we cannot go larger than 18 spins. So we have to go with another method. And this is the so-called shift inverse method that we decided to apply to this problem. So the shift inverse method, this is the following. So instead of looking at the Hamiltonian H itself, what we are going to do, we are going to shift the Hamiltonian by sigma, and sigma, this is basically this red target here, 0.6 something, okay? So we shift Hamiltonian by this, and we invert 1 over H minus sigma. And the idea is now to study this. So the spectrum of this transform Hamiltonian looks like this. So these excited states here in red now become the ground state here, okay? And then we can apply ground state like Langshaw's diagonalization to access the properties here. And doing that, now we gain at almost 2 orders of magnitude in the size of the Hilbert space, which in terms of real space, not so much. So we went from 18 to 24. But the Hilbert space are quite big, 3 million, basically. So applying this technique, so we were able to obtain this mobility H. So here I put the diagram in the other direction. So here I have energy density on the x-axis. These are the strengths here. So we have ergodic versus MBL. By the way, this diagram was also observed in some superconducting qubit experiment by Roshan and al. A few years ago, and this is roughly the same shape. Okay, so you have delocalized in red and localized in blue. So what are the main properties across this phase diagram? So let's start with the ergodic regime. In the ergodic regime, so as I said before, random matrix theory applies. So the level statistic will be of this described by random matrix. The entanglement entropy is large, okay, because here we are infinite temperature, okay? So this is a volume law entanglement entropy. Eigenstates are ergodic. I will come back to that, to this definition of ergodicity later. And if you look at, for example, the dynamics of entanglement, the spreading is very fast, okay? On the other hand, if you go to the MBL regime here at large disorder, the level statistics is of Poisson. The entanglement entropy is not anymore volume law, but area law. Eigenstates are non-ergodic. The entanglement dynamics is very slow, logarithmically growing. And there is also this emergent integrability that I discussed before with this so-called L-bit formulation. Okay, so many things are understood, but there are still some interesting open questions for this many-body localization problem. Here I give a selection of that. One is about the critical properties. Okay, so what about this critical line? Is the mobility H true? What are the critical exponents? What is the nature of the transition? Is it indeed, as proposed recently, a costly-soundless transition? Also recently, more and more numerics, they say that the critical disorder strength is should be a bit larger than that. So can we have like a definite answer on that? So this is a list of open questions, and I'm not going to answer all of them, of course. Another interesting, I think, aspect is the link between MBL and Anderson localization in random graph. Okay, so what people call the Fox space localization, and I will address, I think, this in the just right now. So these are the two. Okay, I don't know how much time I will have, but these are the two possibilities. So I will first discuss the Hilbert space property. Okay, so this is this question of Anderson localization in the Hilbert space. And probably I will not have time to mention what is going on in real space, but this is reviewed in this recent publication. So we can certainly describe MBL as an Anderson problem. How to do that? So this is the original Hamiltonian, okay, the many-body Hamiltonian, but then we can choose a given computational basis. For example, let us take the spin projection along Z as so this is what we call the spin configuration basis, okay? So it's exponentially large, large number of these states, and then written in this computational basis, this many-body Hamiltonian becomes a simple hopping Hamiltonian with a potential. Why that? Because two states J and K are connected by this non-diagonal part, S plus S minus, which basically flip two spins which are up and down. Okay, so that connects two neighbors in this configuration space, and this part SZ and the random field remains diagonal, okay, for this basis states, and that gives a sort of a pseudo random potential. Okay, so we have a simple problem, but the only difficulty is that that lives in a very large space. Okay, and this is a picture, okay, of this many-body spin configuration basis, okay, where you have now roughly 2 to the L sides, and the connectivity on average is L divided by 2, and L, this is the original length of the spin chain, okay, and this is here a distribution of the connectivity, because of course all the states are not, they don't have the same number of flippable pair of spins. For example, the Néel state up, down, up, down, up, down is maximally flippable. Okay, all the pairs are flippable. So this guy in Hilbert space will have L neighbors, while, for example, the state up, 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 down, 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 this one has only 2 neighbors. Okay, so there is a distribution of connectivity which is given here, but the average one is L over 2. So it's a large connectivity. Now let us look at the pseudo-random potential, this mu J, and the mu J is just given by this quantity. So you take the expectation value of a given state J, which is now a site in the Hilbert space. Okay, you take the Hamiltonian, sum of all the side of this. And here, this is a distribution, how this pseudo-random potential are distributed for different disorder strengths. And what, at the end, using a simple random walk argument, we can understand that the variance of this distribution, so sort of pseudo disorder strength, is proportional to the original disorder H, okay, times the square root of the number of original spins. Okay, so we have a connectivity which grows like L, and an effective disorder which grows like square root of L. So this is the basics of the basic ingredients of the problem. And now in this particular space, we want to probe the eigenstates ergodicity. So how to do this? So let us define participation Rényi entropies like this, okay, which are somehow related to what is called inverse participation ratio, okay, here, or the Shannon entropy. So there are different Rényi, different possibility for this entropy, but basically what is the important ingredient is the probability here, Pj, to occupy a given basis state J. Okay, so this is simply the coefficient in the expansion of the given many-body eigenstate psi in this computational basis. And on general grounds, what we expect this participation entropy to be proportional to the logarithm of the total size of the Hilbert space, and the coefficient is what people usually call the multifractal dimension. Okay, and so this multifractal dimension can be, so there are basically three options. The simplest one is full ergodicity. Full ergodicity, that means all the coefficients in this expansion are roughly of the same order of magnitude. Okay, so my wave function basically almost uniformly occupies the Hilbert space, and dq is 1. Okay. On the opposite, if only a finite number, like should be Anderson localization, only a finite number of sites are occupied, that basically means that dq is formally 0. And this participation entropy is only a constant, doesn't grow with the system size anymore. But there is a lot of room in between dq equals 1 and dq equals 0. And if this d is in between, this is what we call a non-ergodic multifractal. Okay, could be only fractal, but could also be multifractal if there is a non-trivial dependency on Q, the Rényi index. So what does it mean? That means still an infinite number of sites are occupied, but this is only a vanishing fraction of the Hilbert space. So, okay, so these are the definition, but now let us try to compute that numerically. And these are the exact recognition results that we obtained with Nicolas, Massé, and Fabien Allais. So these are two examples: weak disorder on the top and strong disorder here. So in the weak disorder, so different symbols are different disorder, but still in the ergodic regime, what we have, we observe as a function of here, this is the Hilbert space size, curl n, but you see this is a log scale, we observe a straight line. And straight line means, okay, this log scale, this log behavior, and the prefactor can be, so we have made fits to this prefactor, and the best fit gives basically 1. Okay, so this is a full delocalization. But when you increase the system size, you start to see a sort of crossover. So this is clearly visible on the green symbols that you see for small system size. It doesn't seem to be ergodic, but when you increase and reach a sufficiently large system size, we believe that this will come back to ergodicity. Okay, like this is maybe more visible on with the blue here. Okay, so, but of course, this will be analyzed using some finite size scaling hypothesis. And I will tell you what are the results afterwards. Before that, let us focus on the strong disorder regime, okay, in the MBL phase. So contrary to Anderson localization, here, this Rényi participation entropy does not saturate. So this is not Anderson localized, but it grows continuously, but with a very small prefactor. Here you look at the numbers. So here it goes, okay, between 0 and 4, and compared to ergodic regime where it goes to very much larger numbers. And the prefactor are the multifractal dimension, and these are the results here of fits 0.23, 0.16 for different Rényi indices. So there's no saturation, as I said, and there is no, so this MBL regime is not Anderson localization in Hilbert space. So in this work, we have performed the finite size scaling analysis, okay? And this is the general picture for the multifractal dimension as a function of disorder strengths. Up to the critical point, which separate delocalized and MBL regime, this multifractal dimension is always 1. Okay, so it's fully delocalized in the Fock space. We found a jump at the transition of this multifractal dimension, and it becomes finite but small and only vanishing very slowly, like 1/h in the infinite disorder limit. And this has also been explained nicely by Tikhonov and Merlin. So here, this is probably an important take-home message that the critical point belongs to the MBL regime, and there is an absence of Fock space localization in the MBL phase. Okay, so I see that probably my time is over. What do you think? Evgeny?
I think you still have some 10 minutes.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I will continue. And okay, maybe it's important here to not to finish on this, because this 1/h behavior that we found numerically for the multifractal, how the multifractal dimension is slowly decaying, can be explained analytically at a strong disorder. And to do that, let us come back to real space. Okay. So in real space, so this is the model, okay? So the standard model, Heisenberg chain in a random field. And so imagine that, okay, I take a huge random field, okay? So I take a box distribution of my field, which is enormous, between -h and h, okay? And then I will say the following. So imagine I say there are 2 types of sites. The sites having a very strong disorder, most of them, and a few sites, red ones, okay, where the field is anomalously small. So that means it comes from this red region in the distribution. Good. So now, if you do that, you can say, okay, the yellow guys, because the field is enormous, they will be almost completely locked by the random field. Impossible to make to have quantum fluctuations up, down. Okay, so I will decide to freeze them either parallel or anti-parallel to the field, because we are not looking at ground state, but that can be very high energy. So that can be locked in the opposite direction of the magnetic field. And this is what I did here in this B panel. You see that these few yellow sites are locked. And then what I call the active sites, the one which remain, let's say, alive after this simple decimation, are the red ones, and they are probably still connected, okay, in perturbation with the perturbation process. But importantly, the number of such active sites has been drastically reduced as compared to the original L sites. And this is first simple argument. This is simply the area of this red region. Okay, and here we have a cutoff gamma that we don't really know what it is, but this is a finite number. And let's put it here as a parameter, this gamma. And so the remaining active sites is simply L times this area. And this area is just gamma divided by the disorder strength, H. Good. So in a sense, that means the active part of the Hilbert space is been also drastically reduced. And a typical eigenstate will have this form: a number of L frozen spins which are completely locked, okay, like classical tensor products, with still quantum fluctuating spins, but with a number of active sites in Hilbert space, which has been drastically reduced. And this number of active sites is simply 2 to L active, and 2 to L active is the site of the Hilbert space to the power gamma over H, H being, again, the disorder strength. So now if we assume that these active sites, they are perfectly ergodic, then we apply this simple formula for the participation entropy, that it is log of the number of active sites in Hilbert space, and we immediately get this 1 over H prefactor in front of log n. And this is the multifractal dimension. So you see, at this very strong disorder argument describes quite well what is going on in the problem. And so we have checked that numerically at huge disorder. So you see here, this is the participation entropy divided by the log of the Hilbert space size. So roughly this gives the multifractal dimension as a function of disorder strength. And we went for numerics up to 100 for the size of the box distribution, and this 100 has to be compared to the coupling constant in front of the spin-spin interaction, which is 1 here. Okay, so 1. So this is very huge disorder, and so the symbols are exact diagonalization results on small system, but here we don't really need to go to big system because the finite size effects are very small in this strong disorder regime, and we checked that. For almost the full regime, indeed, this multifractal dimension decay like 1 over H. Okay, so this is a remarkable result, that this naive decimation, okay, this is, at first sight, we say, this is a bit naive not to say, I eliminate some site and I just keep a fraction of site which are still alive, but this seems to describe exactly what is going on at strong disorder, and even when you approach the transition, which is around here. Okay, so this 1 over H perfectly describes the multifractal dimension. And so, of course, this observation triggered the question: this naive decimation, maybe that could be made a bit more serious, a bit more quantitative. So first of all, is it well justified in the sense that are some sites really polarized or not? And so to look at that, let us focus on the local magnetization, okay? Here it's infinite temperature, okay? So you look at the distribution of this expectation value of the local spin expectation, okay, MZ, and at weak disorder, what you see something which is expected from the eigenstate summarization hypothesis, which is this will, the average would be 0 and the distribution should slowly shrink, okay? This is H equals 1, so very weak disorder. On the other hand, if you go to strong disorder, so these symbols are for disorder 7, okay? So we are in the MBL regime, and you see almost no size dependence, and there is this beautiful U-shaped distribution. So that means most of the sites, they have a magnetization which is minus 0.5 or 0.5, okay? So roughly this seems to be justified, but let's be more quantitative and to study this power law, these tails. And I said power law because this is something we found numerically, that this the tail of the distribution here and there, of course, because this is symmetric, they behave like a power law. And so we define the deviation, okay, delta from perfect polarization. So this is 1/2, which is the perfect polarization, minus the absolute value of the spin expectation value. And okay, so something we did, which was a bit new in this field of MBL, was to look at the extreme value statistics here for this singular distribution. And so the idea is the following. On a finite system, if you want to say what is the maximally polarized spin, or in other words, what is the minimal deviation, okay, delta mean, this is simply this extreme value statistics arguments. You take the integral between 0 and this minimum, okay, of the distribution, and you say, because I have only L sides, this should be, the probability should be like 1 over L, okay, 1 out of L sides. It goes like 1 over L. And doing that, we expect the most polarized side for each sample to be a power law like this of the system size. Okay, so let us check that numerically. And these are, again, ED results for this now minimal delta. So, and delta, I recall, this is the deviation from perfect polarization. And as a function of system size for many different disorder strengths. And you see qualitatively very different results. So, okay, so that means there are some sites which at the thermodynamic limit will get perfectly frozen. Because you see, this is going to 0. So that means SIZ is going to plus or minus 1/2 for some sites. Okay, so this is the picture. On the finite system, you have something which is very close to perfect polarization, but not completely polarized. Okay, but at the thermodynamic limit, these become effectively completely polarized. And that means the chain will break at the thermodynamic limit, because if this one becomes completely polarized, there is no possible perturbative process above this guy, because here this is exactly plus or minus 1/2. So from these numerics, what we conclude is was good news. It was that the spin decimation appears to be well justified. Okay, so then, okay, I have many other slides, so I think I will probably stop now and try to conclude. But interestingly, we try to analyze also this exponent of the decay, because this exponent is a function of the disorder in the MBL regime, and this is how it behaves as a function of disorder. So this is this gamma that we call the freezing exponent, the way the perfect polarization is attained. And this is how this gamma exponent behaves as a function of disorder. And at strong disorder, there is a log behavior that is understood analytically, that we have understood. And here there is a jump in the transition regime of this gamma, which of course this gamma should ultimately in the ergodic regime become 0. So here there are some finite size, some sort of oscillation due to this non-monotonous, non-monotonic behavior. But eventually this should go to 1/2, meaning gamma is going to 0. So this is the picture, that we have this exponent gamma, which is an important quantity, in fact, for the MBL transition, which is 0, no spin freezing here. There is a jump of this exponent, and then it grows and becomes logarithmically growing at very large disorder. So, yeah, I think I will now go to my summary and conclusion. For this problem. So I hope I convince you that disorder is a very important and crucial ingredient for interacting quantum systems. And I mostly discuss this problem of disorder for the many-body localization problem at high energy. And I took the example of the Heisenberg spin chain in a random field. So we have found, we have several results. One is there is a mobility edge in the energy, in the disorder energy plane. The MBL transition is in fact an ergodic to a multifractal transition and not an ergodic to localized in the Hilbert space, but multifractal in the Hilbert space. And this 1/h behavior of the multifractal dimension has motivated more study in real space, and we found that there is a spin freezing mechanism at play in the many-body localization regime. And something I didn't have time to explain is that the fact that this exponent gamma as a jump at the transition is completely compatible with the Corsalis-Saules scenario for this MBL transition. What are the perspectives of this topic? There are, of course, several interesting ones. One is, of course, can we go beyond one dimension? And so what I discussed so far is mostly numerics in 1D, and the maximum system size we can do using shift invert exact diagonalization on supercomputers is basically 24 spins. So, okay, but from, let's say, 8, 10, 12 up to 24, we have a small range on which we can do some finite size scaling analysis, like what is shown here. Okay, so you have a few system size, and this is maybe not enough, but this is already something, and so we can try to draw some conclusions on that. But going to 2D and even 3D appears nowadays impossible using shift invert exact diagonalization techniques, and so we have to think about different methods. One possibility would be DMRG, but even though DMRG is more for ground state in 1D, but maybe PEPS or maybe quantum Monte Carlo for high energy. So there are some projects to try this, but this is a very hard problem, I should say. Other perspectives, of course, come from the universality class of this transition. So here we have good evidences that it should fall in the Corsalis-Saules universality, but is it true for other models showing MBL, like a transverse field-izing model in the presence of interaction, or other types of model using quasi-periodicity of the disorder? So this is an open question. And also other topic which are today quite interesting is the links between MBL and topological order, which can appear in some Ising Majorana chains. So with that, I will close my talk, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. That's a lot of food for thought. Very interesting talk. Thank you. Now this would be good time to ask questions or make comments. So just unmute yourself and shoot away. Right. While other people are gathering their thoughts, maybe I can open the question session. You mentioned that in this MBL phase, you have sort of emergent integrability. Is there any understanding what are the conservation laws? Because if it's integrable, then there are infinitely many conservation laws. What are they? And whether it's possible to do something better ansatz-like if it's integrable. And maybe transition. Yeah.
My understanding of the conservation laws is what they call the L beats, which are this. Well, maybe I can come back maybe to the where it was. Yeah, this. So this simple unitary transformation. Well, simple, not that simple, but this unitary transformation. Here, yeah. Okay, so then what is, for me, what is conserved, okay, this is not the original spins operator themselves, okay, they don't commute with the Hamiltonian, but this tau, okay, you know, so this is a bit, well, not strange, but a bit, so we don't really know what is, because formally it's very hard. So it has been sort of proven perturbatively, recursively, okay, that this and this, the MBL Hamiltonian should take this form, but you say there is dot, 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 dot. So that means you should allow all spin interaction, all range. But of course, this J should decay, and they decay fast. But conservation, I would say conservation laws are this tau I. The tau I, they commute with the Hamiltonian. But once we have said that, well, I think so in a sense here, the integrability is directly visible in the sense that if you're allowed to write down the Hamiltonian in this form, okay, this is a simple, this is a simple classical form, right? So the job is done. So the difficulty is this part, you know. And what is the precise form of this unitary transformation acting on the original Pauli operator? This is a complicated task, and I think there are a few works. In particular, I'm thinking of Torsten Wahl in UK, who tried to design a sort of algorithm, and I think probably also Jens Eisert in Germany tried the same, to try to write down an algorithm able to optimize and get a form of this unitary transformation, not the exact one, but a approaching form of this this transformation.
Well, thanks. Now, other questions from the audience? Well, then I'll probably have one more. We still have a few minutes, I think. So if I think in terms of this XXZ model, in terms of these hardcore bosons, how would statistics of winding numbers look like in different phases?
Okay, so winding numbers in terms of hardcore bosons, I know you're an expert on that, is related to the superfluid density, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is here. Okay, here I show the phase diagram, but zero temperature. And at zero temperature, well, this is clear, huh? Localized Bose glass has a zero winding number fluctuations, zero, zero superfluid density, while here in this red region, this is superfluid and this is finite.
Yeah.
But this is zero temperature. Then if you go to high energy, I'm pretty sure that they will all be zero, right? Because at finite temperature, you cannot have superfluid stiffness at finite temperature in one dimension. So yeah, I think this winding number fluctuation will not show any difference. Maybe, well, of course they go to zero, but the way they go to zero could be also an indicator as a function of system size. Okay, so that might be. But again, this doing Monte Carlo at finite temperature for this MBL problem doesn't really help. So yeah, so I think winding number is maybe not. But okay, we could look at that using exact diagonalization as well. The superfluid density or the Drude weight, if you wish, and looking, that might be something to look at. But if I remember, I remember to have seen a paper from a German group, I forgot who precisely, who looked at superfluid stiffness across the MBL. So I can try to find out this, and I send you the reference.
Yeah, I would really appreciate that if that would be possible.
Yeah.
It's probably just like you said, it's still similar to 1D, so higher temperature will not do anything drastic, but yeah, just mostly for my education.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you very much. So other questions from the audience? Audience is shy. Well then, let's thank the speaker. Let's thank Nicola for a very, very nice talk, very inspiring one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So it's like that. I mean, it's a pity that we could not meet in person. But
yeah, let's hope things will change to better.
Yeah.
In finite time, so that the expectation time does not diverge. Let's hope it's localized in that space.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Evgeny. Thank you.
Right. So we are breaking off for lunch, and we are coming back with the next talk, which will be from Anastasia Garchavkina about superconducting adiabatic neuron-based something on Josephson contacts in half an hour. So
is it for the same with the same link?
Yes, same link. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay. So yeah, you will not close the session, or will you?
I think no. I'll just keep it. I'll stop the recording, and in half an hour I'll restart.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. So then, see you around.
Bye bye.
Bye now. All right, so let's hope it'll work. So welcome everybody to this computational physics and complex systems session. And the next speaker is Anastasia Garchavkina, who somehow delocalized between Nizhny Novgorod and Moscow. And he's going to tell us something about dynamic processes in superconducting adiabatic neurons based on Josephson contacts. Anastasia, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for introducing Evgeny. So I'll skip then the first slide. Okay. So it's a fact that artificial intelligence is a rapidly developing field in computer science, and it's already taken an important place in business and academia. And nature itself has inspired for us for many breakthroughs. And so the case of artificial intelligence is not an exception. So that's why, in order to build something really intellectual, we inspired by human brain. Artificial neural networks are the most promising tool to build artificial intelligence, as they model biological neurons, real biological neurons. Of course, it's much simpler model, but it still can handle main features of human brain, such as the ability to learn, ability to model complex separating feature surfaces, and also it has ability of distributed memory. All these features can be very useful in computational problems. But the search of element base still continues, and the great example is Google's tensor processor units that already So they based on semiconductor technology, and their performance exceeded exaflops. Nevertheless, such semiconductor structures has a number of disadvantages, such as high energy consumption, limited clock frequencies, and also complex cell structure. So a very good alternative to build such neuron systems is to use superconducting circuits with Josephson junction or Josephson contacts.
Anastasia, excuse me, you're still showing the first slide, I'm afraid.
Oh my, okay, so I don't know how to fix it.
If you try stopping your screen presentation, restarting it maybe?
Yes.
Apologies for interrupting you, and thanks, Dmitry, for noticing this. Okay, that's still the first slide.
Even now?
Yeah, it's still the first slide.
I'll try the other presentation, I mean link one.
Yeah, this shows motivation. That was a different slide.
Okay. I don't know how it works. So.
Well, complex systems.
Yes, unfortunately. So yeah, I was talking about these systems with so it's superconducting circuits with Josephson junctions. As I said, they are very promising because of their energy efficiency and because they has nonlinearity in its nature. I mean that current on Josephson junction is a cosine function of phase difference on the junction. So it's cosine phase difference on the junction. We will refer to it as phi, and current here is cosine from phi. So and RF squid, the A picture is the simplest case of such circuit, but unfortunately it has inconvenient transfer function. So it has nonlinearity, but we can't really apply this function in learning tasks as opposite to, for example, sigmoidal function. It represented at the first pair of pictures. And the system that generates such a transition function is depicted here. It's also a superconducting circuit, and it also has a Josephson junction, but a little bit different structure. So we will study this system and we will refer to it as to sigmoidal neuron. As I said, we are going to investigate that system.
I apologize again, you're still showing us the motivation slide.
I don't know, maybe there's some lag here.
I'm afraid not. Well, maybe what we can do, if the system behaves the way it does, is that when you change the slide, you stop your showing your screen, change the slide and switch it. Maybe that will work. Okay, let's try this way. So you see the next slide now, yes? This has a schematic representation of an artificial SC neuron cell. Is that what you want to show? Yes. Yeah, great. So as I said, I don't want to come back to previous picture, but
So we write down Kirchhoff equation for that system, physical. And the second equation is for the current of Josephson in Josephson junction, so this current. And current, output current is derived, can be derived as on third equation. So this, the third equation is actually a transfer function for such a system. So this is just a schematic representation of a previous physical model. And also I wanted to say that I will use here a term transfer function, but it also can be, it's synonym to activation function. So it's the same in this context. Also, we set parameters A and B. They are simply derived from third equation and just for convenience. Let's move to other slide. Oops, I'm sorry. I closed it. Okay. Mm-hmm.
No screen yet?
Yes, because I somehow closed the presentation. Okay. Sorry for that. I somehow
No worries, just take your time.
Okay, thank you. I just had it at other place from browser, and somehow I can't open Zoom now in order to present.
Then we take a short break until you fix this problem. No big deal.
Mm-hmm. So okay, let's move on. Do you see the screen now? Great. So then we will write the mentioned equation in order to a resistance capacitance model. So it's a model when we set some non-zero capacitance and resistance in Josephson junction. So we don't consider it just like a superconducting system with no loss. And so okay, we write the fifth equation. Here it's just without resistance. We include only the capacitance, and we write it as the system of equation of first order, the sixth, and it's it can be described as so it's such system describes dynamic of a particle in a potential field. The field represented in the potential field represented in the seventh equation, and also we have here animation for each values of L parameters. So L parameters, L, LA, and L out, it's just some physical parameters of the system. They were shown previously. So just some values of inductance. And I wanted to say, yes, as you can see, we can distinguish here two different modes of dynamic. First one is simple potential with one minimum. And the second one is where the system has two minimums. And first one we will call as a neural mode, and the second one is logical mode. We will see further why is that. And I just wanted to say that we had shown that that in order to get a logical mode, the potential with two minimum, we have to the 9 equation had to be our parameters have to I forgot the right word, but okay, the 9 relations have to be held in order to get the second logical mode. So for neuron, it's important to have some input value in order to get some output. So that's how the neuron works. And for input value, we have here phi in parameter. So it's just external flux. And in our model, it has such a function like a step. And this function represents the entire cycle. As you can see, after a entire cycle, we return to a 0 initial state. And here we can see transfer function for different modes. Here it's just with the capacitance and without dissipation. The biggest picture is for neural mode, and we see that there's a very good sigmoidal function. And so the dynamic represents itself on the second semi-period. I mean that the function on the first semi-period, so at first semi-period, we got this function, and then when we return, when we decrease phi in value, we move in at other direction, but we repeat the same function, and and we got here symmetry, as you can see. But for logical mode, it's not working. We have here very large oscillations, and also there are no symmetry. So this the logical mode for different L parameters. So let's see what will happen when we add dissipation to the system. Dissipation here is this a parameter with gamma. And so we continue the same procedure. I forgot to mention that we solved this system before without gamma value, and here with Runge-Kutta method. So for this case, the dissipation one, we got interesting results. First of all, for logical mode, we see the smoothing of oscillations. So the blue lines is for gamma value 0.5, and the green lines here is gamma equals 5. And we see that as with the increasing gamma, we got the smoother lines, and also we see here emerging of hysteresis. And it's worth to mention that hysteresis occurs for both modes, for logical and neural one. So what will, so how to take into account the influence of temperature? We got an ensemble of particles from Gibbs distribution. Here it represented at temperature 4 kelvins. So we got 10,000 such particles and consider them as initial states. And then we imply the same function as shown. So the function of external field, external parameter. So we're changing the state with that external function. Here it's the case with capacitance, but without any dissipation. And we see here that we got the same transfer function for after averaging over all ensembles for neural mode. So it represented it repeated case without any temperature. And for logical mode, we got non-trivial results. So it's the second animation. As you can see, particles acquire some energy and then started moving in circle for first semi-period. And at the second semi-period, some of the particles returned back to initial state, and some of them continued moving in a circle. Also, it was to mention, of course, with the dissipation, all those particles will move to the center. And so the dissipation ruins this effect. So that's all I wanted to say. We are moving to conclusions now. The main result of our work is that we studied sigmoidal neuron with effects of temperature, dissipation, and non-zero capacitance. We found out that this system has two different dynamic modes, logical and neuron one. And also we defined the range of parameters for both these modes. And we found out some interesting influence of dissipation. I mean, the emergence of hysteresis in this system. And to sum up, we believe that our newfound results will be applied for building neuromorphical cells. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Anastasia. Let's thank the speaker. Trying to find the reaction. Yeah, let's thank Anastasia. And questions or comments, please.
Hello. Anastasia, thank you very much for an interesting talk. Can you show, please, the slide number 8?
I hope so. Number 8.
8, yes, just the previous one. Yes, Thank you. On the figure on the right, in the animation, there occurs a parting event, right? So the particles, some of the particles go inside, and
yes, I tried to
arrange this.
I tried
to
describe. I tried to describe it. I mean, I mentioned it that really it's the logical mode with two minimums in potential, and so after switching the after the switching minimum, particles got some energy. I mean, maybe this picture will be more useful. So it's the red line, red potential. And for example, particles for this state went to this and
local minima.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's why they start moving into the in a circle. And
yeah, I just wanted to ask, from the initial state of the ensemble, which particles go? Did you make an exploring about which particles go to one local minima and which particles go to another?
So no, I didn't, because so I believe I have explanation of this. As you can see, I hope I can. Yeah, I stopped it. So here particles moving in some direction. So here they move from the left to right. And here, for example, in opposite to the right, from the right to left. And when we have the other semi-period, we have like a force that makes particles to switch their directions. And so when the force is, the fourth force direction is opposite to the direction to the particle's direction, I assume it just changes its energy, the energy of particles.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I have another question about the parameters you used in the model. I think on slide 2, you introduced them, or slide 3. Maybe 4. Yeah. Is there any physical meaning behind L out, L a?
Yes, of course. So it was the most problematic picture, the most problematic slide. So as I said, it's physical parameters, but here we have some different. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's my fault. We have here different names for such parameters. And I can't come up. So LA, I hope stays the same. Okay, I want. So yeah, it's physical parameters, but I can't name them on this picture. That's maybe.
Well, I suggest we move this discussion to the separate discussion.
Oh, okay.
If you won't mind. So Anastasia gathers her thoughts and works it out, and we can discuss it after the talk, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Anastasia.
Any further questions to Anastasia? Well, again, sorry for cutting off the discussion. Let's keep to a schedule. Let's thank Anastasia again.
Thank you.
And let's move to the next speaker of the session, which is Igor Tsarkov from the Moscow State University. Igor, please. So the next speaker of the section is Igor Tsarkov from Moscow State University, and he's going to tell us about Mach disks and caustic reflections and applications to astrophysics. So Igor, please. I don't think we hear you. Your mic seems to be off. No, your microphone is still off.
One of the perspective directions in geometric approximation theory is use of its methods to study solutions of the Hamilton-Jacobi equations and their features, including caustic of the surface of these solutions level. One of the Hamilton-Jacobi equations representatives is the aconal equation, U equals 1 or its generation f, U equals 1 where the function U, x, is usually defined on an open subset omega of Rn. Here we will focus mainly on caustic reflections in mirrors of the semi-ellipsoid and paraboloid form. These cases will simulate known examples that occur in everyday life. The radiation of the waves from the respective surfaces will be carried out in a fairly small or large enough part of these surfaces near these shapes' top. In this way, we will be able to emulate, for example, the behavior of plasma flow when it erupts from an engine nozzle. And then we will study the strong compaction of the flow, that is caustic, arising as a result of multiple reflections inside such mirrors, which in some first approximation simulate the boundaries of separation of environments, air plasma or air liquid. Recall one important circumstance. In the two-dimensional case, the caustic lows and highs of the distance to the environment boundary coincide, and in three-dimensional case already differ from each other. Note at once that the balls of space X, including asymmetrical, are used to build the next in time wavefront according of the principle of Huygens, which is an envelope, taking into consideration this front movement direction of combing set of the same radius balls with the centers on the corresponding previous front. An important part of a special set is caustic. Dynamically, the body of a certain shape seeks to change its shape to the caustic of this form, in the absence or disparaging small forces of interaction. In fact, this effect can be observed for a liquid in weightlessness, which continuously changes shape, trying to get closer to the caustic generated by this dynamically changing form. Only the forces counteracting compression do not allow this to happen. The fact that the form with an almost spherical border has the caustic set concentrated near the approximate center of this form. The resulting form constantly changes chasing caustics. This, of course, occurs due to the property of incompressibility of fluid. There are, of course, cases when the form of liquid can and does change to the approximate position of the caustic of its border. For gases, the form eventually begins to take the form of caustics, or caustics of lows, minima, or caustics of highs, maxima. This explains the evolution of elliptical, ellipsoid-shaped galaxies, as younger ones, to spiral and to spiral with a jumper, spiral-barred galaxies. It also explains the existence of galaxies with a polar ring. In short, caustics is the law of evolution of forms. It should be noted that the idea of forms of galaxies as caustics, generated by gravitational waves, belongs to Bezeldovich. In the first picture, there is density distribution of a real galaxy. In the following two pictures, caustics minima and maxima of ellipsoids with different axes. These caustic images show that the caustics of minima and caustics of maxima have symmetry planes that cross these caustics across the ellipses. These planes are mutually perpendicular. Let's call them elliptical planes. Part of the substance moving from the ellipsoid boundary first touches the surface of the caustics of minima, and then the surface of the caustics of maxima. In fact, there occurs concentration of matter near these caustics. And near the caustics of minima there begins to be formed a singularity which shifts closer to its center. Similarly, a singularity is formed in the center of caustics of maxima if, of course, there is enough substance. The rest of the particles of the substance rush past, accelerating in the force field of singularities and changing the trajectory of its path. Thus, there occurs rotations of matter around singularities in elliptical planes, and spiral arms are formed later. Eventually, the substance spreads in elliptical planes. An important role in the distribution of matter near the elliptical planes there plays narrowing near the general center of caustics of sets consisting of segments of rays between the touch points of caustics of minima and caustics of maxima. With enough matter there is formed a joint from two galaxies, which by error sometimes attributed to the colliding galaxies. In fact, this object does not have many visible deformations at first, as the object was formed as one. These joints in astrophysics are called galaxies with a polar ring. Further, while developing, one of the galaxies can change the angle of tilt from direct to more acute, causing a non-catastrophic deformation of the partner's main plane. Let us consider, for example, SPRC7, which is one of the largest. The ring diameter is about 50 kiloparsecs, and the farthest among conformed galaxies with a polar ring. The massive ring here consists of gas and stars and rotates not perpendicular to the plane of the galaxy disk, but at the angle of 73 degrees to it. In some moment, the partner galaxy may fall into the curved plane of its partner. If the partner's mass is large enough, it can lead to one of the types of a wrong galaxy. This internal catastrophe is usually not as significant as when two neighboring galaxies collide. And in the whole, the wrong galaxy also has a flat shape and retains its rotation. An example of the latter case is the lenticular galaxy NGC 1375, which has two intersecting bars appearing to be the remnants of pro-existing partners. Such diamonds, rhomuses, can also be formed after an explosion in the galaxy center inside the matter jets emitted in opposite directions. Until now, the reasons for such a picture were unknown. As a result of the described above process, merger of partners, there can be formed flat galaxies with many nuclei, cores, or galaxies containing their partners in the form of an independent galaxy within themselves. It is believed that the most ring galaxies in our universe is formed as a result of internal processes, and only 1 in 1,000 is formed as a result of collision. If the substance was not enough, instead of the partner there are formed a usual bulge and halo. In the case when the two semi-axes of the ellipsoid are close to each other in length and differ from the length of the third semi-axis, one of the minimum or maximum caustics becomes like a stick. Ellipsoids with such semi-axis are about 2/3 of all ellipsoids. During evolution of such a galaxy there are formed so-called galaxies with a jumper, barred galaxies. These galaxies have two spiral arms emanating from the ends of this stick. Barred galaxies are 2/3 of all spiral galaxies. Note that the movement in the spiral arms generates in them mock disks. These structures will be discussed later, which is a honeycomb structure. If you reach a higher level of hierarchy, you can see how congestions of galaxies evolve if their shape was originally ellipsoid. Elements, particles, of such a congestion will be separate galaxies. One can hope that this congestion will evolve to a form like the form of spiral galaxies. And spiral arms from galaxies will also form mock disks, and we will see the cellular structure of the universe, which is observed in fact. Moreover, there will be formed clumps, clusters, in elliptical planes of such a structure in the form of an ellipse, filled with galaxies, or more precisely arms from galaxies. Perhaps the object, called the wall of the South Pole, located 500 million light-years behind the bright Milky Way. The Milky Way diameter is about 100,000 light-years, stretching over 1.4 billion light-years and containing hundreds of thousands of galaxies, is a similar cluster. The next image shows a visualization of this object. And since in the spiral arms consisting of galaxies, there also appear mock disks, you get giant thread-like compounds from these galaxies. Of course, this is just a hypothesis. Below is the picture of a huge group of quasars, huge LQG, U1.27, the largest from the known large group of quasars consisting of 73X quasars. With a size of 4 billion light-years, it is one of the largest structures in the observable universe. In this picture, we see a familiar structure of partners. The provisions of this paragraph are outlined in the author's work 7. Consider the light reflection law in the case when the structure, generally non-Euclidean, of the space is determined by an asymmetric norm. The asymmetric norm is determined by the Minkowski functional of an asymmetric convex ball. Let's talk now about the so-called mock disks, or rhomboses or diamonds. A typical example of the mentioned formations can be seen in a jet from rocket or aircraft engines. A more impressive picture arises with slow motion shooting of a water stream flowing out of a bottle under the action of gravity. In this picture you can see volumetric figures of rotation of curved rhomboses touching each other. The official explanation for these effects is the following. The flow of matter breaks out of the nozzle, the bottle neck, at first quickly expands and then is compressed by the above pressure ambient air re-squeezing this stream, and this situation manifests itself again and again. In places of increased flow compression, there is a squeezing into the flow of the boundary of the separation of the environments. In this place, there are created shock waves, which form mock disks. The presence of this sequence of disks is explained by the presence of repetitive periodically punching. We will criticize this picture of events. First, in the places of squeezing, shock waves would have to give rise to completely homogeneous figures, but this is not the case. These disks turn out to be hollow, as seen in the next picture of temperature distribution. This disk non-occupancy effect can also be tested on a flat water jet model. To do this, it is enough to pour water carefully through the wide edge of the pelvis. As a result, a relatively flat mock disk will be formed, which along the one-dimensional boundary will be thick, swell. That is, on this boundary the liquid will be concentrated more than in its flat innards. Further, these streams of excess liquid at the edge of the rhombus, diamond, collide at one point completing the rhombus, diamond. There will be an effect of splashing liquid in the perpendicular plane with the formation of the next disk diamond in this plane and so on. Of course, the air with its pressure quickly enough will turn this flat jet into almost cylindrical. Mock flat disk can be seen in the inversion trail behind the tail of an aircraft. The trail is formed by clamping hot streams of emitted gases which breaks off from two jet engines in the tail of the aircraft. The form of airflow becomes visible due to the condensation of water vapors in the perturbed airflow. There is also a three-dimensional object, as an example, about which it is known that it is hollow. It's the so-called finger of death. Under the ice of Antarctica, from its bottom, there are formed ice icicles. They take salt from the surrounding ice. After a while, a heavily supercooled salt solution rushes down the direction of the bottom. Passing through the water, the hollow icicle in the shape of mock disk is formed. Reaching the bottom, this finger spreads an ice trail on the bottom, freezing and killing all living objects in its path. By the way, this trail also consists of mock disks, but already flat. The shape of the finger is more like the shape of flame in a high vessel where the effect of sucking cold air is minimal. Continuing to criticize the official version of mock disks, we, secondly, will build a more adequate model of the phenomenon occurring. In short, mock disks are, in our opinion, are caustic reflections. We'll discuss the flat case at first. For example, as a dividing environment boundary, let us consider a parabola and half of an ellipse. These model cases track well all the effects associated with the formation of mock disks and their decays. In the next two pictures, we see caustic reflection, namely mock disks. And this is the correct interpretation of appearance of these disks. It is caustic reflection. In the first picture, we look at the specified effect where the reflection is taken from a small part of the curve near the top. The second picture shows a similar situation, but a smaller part of the curve at the top is not involved in the flow radiation. The metric in the considered cases is the most common Euclidean, that is, the space norm is determined by the usual ball. In the beginning, it was discussed that the consideration of an asymmetrical metric by selecting the ball center not at its symmetry center simulates radiation behavior in the environment movement at some constant speed. In the following example, we look at an ordinary Euclidean ball with the center shifted to 0.9 radius along the larger elliptical axis from the top to the center. The picture shows the appearance of the herringbone effect. This effect is also enhanced by increasing the surface curve area, which the initial waves are emitted from. Compare with the real picture. The last picture already shows the shape of the rip current, the current that occurs near the coast of the sea. The following version uses simulation where a parabola is used as the boundary of the separation of environments and, accordingly, in the three-dimensional version there is paraboloid rotation. Also, the selection of a center with a shift simulates the speed of the environment. You can see that in this case, there is a noticeable deformation of mock disks. We will now discuss the so-called flow compression substance jet. Consider a cause of the visible change in the jet shape, bending the flow boundary towards the inside of the stream, how this boundary deformation occurs and what role it plays. Of course, mock disks are not generated by these form changes. We have already discussed this above. In some isolated flow area due to dynamic process stabilization, the average density of the substance is the same at every moment in time. However, this density is not the same in different places in this area. Let's remember how the compacted substance flow moves near the caustic reflection. This is shown in the first picture. On the right side of each rhombus, the compacted substance moves along the rhombus sides towards the boundary of the environments. Therefore, from the right side of the rhombus near the border near the rhombus top, there is formed a hump of matter outwards. On the left side of each rhombus, the compacted stream moves from the boundary of the environments into the inside of the stream. Therefore, a pit is formed on the left side near the border near the rhombus top, as there the substance flow density decreases. This is shown in the second picture. This is the effect of flow compression, which is the law of maintaining the average density of a fixed flow area. These hump and pit respectively decrease and increase of density in the case of gas, and respectively decrease and increase of circulation in the case of liquid, are formed near the rhombus top located near the boundary of the environments. The boundary shape near this top forms a corner of the edge facing the flow area. The following pictures illustrate what this boundary deformation leads to. The peak break towards the medium of the erupting substance generates the matter scattering inside the green dotted area. As a result, all Mach disks blur, their appearance becomes blurred and deformed, and their contact with each other is disturbed. Visually, they are at a decent distance from each other, as in real pictures of the jet engine. In addition, due to this effect, Mach visible disks decrease and become smaller the farther away from the nozzles they are. For the same reason, the compression places, and in fact the place of rarefaction of the substance due to its strong outflow along the disk rib to the center, are shifted closer to the axis of the plasma area. They should be near the tops of the Mach rhombus or diamonds, and the plasma flow itself also decreases in the cross-section when it is removed from the nozzle to the stream end. The dispersion sectors, the green dotted interior in the first picture, press the scattering substance from Mach original disks to the boundary between the two deformed observed disks. This substance, as it is hotter, begins to glow in a warmer spectrum. In addition, this cluster causes the boundary of the environments between the two neighboring diamonds, rhomuses, to bulge. At the back of this bulge, the concentration of plasma becomes smaller, as in the left side of the diamond, the substance tends to the center of the flow. In this case, a small thinner layer on the disk right side breaks into this part closer to the media interface, increasing the density pressure near the section. Note here that in the case of water flows, due to the incompressibility of the liquid, in this part pressure dramatically reduces, what leads to the effect of cavitation, formation of a mixture of water and air bubbles. This area is black dotted. The usual effect of cavitation is the destruction of the surface on which water flows. A typical situation is flow of creeks. On the surface, there may be traces in the shape of deformed Mach disks. At the same time, of course, if the flow speed is significant due to the dynamics of the process, the configuration of the disks is inconsistent and progresses over time. As a result, on the surface, the effects of cavitation form an oblong uneven shape of traces in the form of rings connecting with each other. Compare with the next real picture. I remind you that in these three-dimensional pictures should, as opposed to a two-dimensional situation, there is a central axial flow. As a result, we get a reasonable model of the process while describing the real situation up to the disintegration of the flow.
Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Igor. Let's thank the speaker. Questions or comments to the speaker? Well, if there aren't, if the audience has been shy, then I have one actually. So these Mach disks are, is it correct to say that they are not actually disks? They typically have some trickier geometry. And then if that's the case, then what exactly defines the geometry of this Mach object? Well, your microphone's off, I'm afraid.
The Mach disk is caustic of reflection. Значит, ну да. Caustic reflection. Geometrically, it's we consider the caustic of ellipse or parable and then manipulated with this geometrical figure for the gets caustic of reflection. It's a special algorithm, and the computer produce the picture which we may observe, значит, with a real picture from nature or technology processes.
Thank you. Thank you. Further questions to the speaker? Comments? Well, if not, let's thank the speaker again. Now let's move to the next talk of the session, which, as far as I understand, should be David Kagramanyan from HSE. So David, you're around?
I'm here.
Yeah, great. So share your screen. I'm restarting the recording. So it's all yours.
Hello, my name is David. I am a student of Higher School of Economics. Today, I'm going to tell you about our work called Computer Analysis of the Cemented Carbides Microstructure. Our work has a fairly significant value because hard alloys based on cemented carbides are widely used in mining, such as oil or gas, road construction and mechanical engineering, and etc. Improvement of those hard alloys requires the development technologies based on fundamentally new approaches. These happen because the tools and technologies that engineers and scientists use today in major has already reached their limits. We propose the new method for microstructure analysis of hard alloy, tungsten carbide with cobalt, using computer vision and neural network. On the right side of the slide, you can see images we work with. These images we created using scanning electronic microscope. Our goal is to find dependencies, hidden dependencies between mechanical properties of the alloy, such as hardness, viscosity, magnetic moment, and the data extracted from the microstructure images. To achieve goal, we need to solve few tasks. The first one is determine angles, contact angles between tungsten carbide grains and between tungsten carbide and cobalt regions. The second one is measure the cobalt regions, width and height, and create artificial images. And the last but not least, find the way to extract a vector of hidden features. Company Element 6 made for us samples of the alloy from tungsten carbide powder and cobalt powder. After milling and pressing, the samples were sintered in vacuum furnace, and then the last step, the samples were mechanically grounded and polished with diamond paste. Our friends from Mises University created microstructure images using scanning electron microscope. The first task, we tried to determine angles, boundary angles between tungsten carbide grains. We used several segmentation methods, such as watershed, float fill, some methods from mathematical morphology, but no one provided any level of grain highlighting. It happens because, in fact, grains do not have any visible boundary, and if the human is not able to see a boundary, these algorithms are not able to do it. In some cases, noise image entropy can highlight each grain regions, but it doesn't work for images where the it doesn't work on images with a small average grain size. All required regions are presented as union gray mass, and you can see it on the image that the big grains actually have some visible boundary, but small grains they don't have it. As we are not able to find and determine any boundary between tungsten carbide grains, we can solve task by another way. We can highlight each cobalt regions because they are represented explicitly. We used some image filters such as Otsu binarization, Sobel filter, Kenny edge detector, and Ramer-Douglas-Pecker algorithm. And as a result, for each cobalt region, we get a list of points that characterize a region's shape, such as corners and breakpoints. You can see these points on the image. They are represented as gray circles. And eventually, as we get the points of the corners and breakpoints, we can compute angles using dot product based on two vectors ordinating from the same point on the contour. The distribution of these angles in some way follows the bimodal Gaussian distribution, and it's clearly that each distribution behaves its own way, but every distribution have two peaks. The second task is measuring cobalt regions. As I mentioned before, we got for each cobalt region, we got the list of contour points, and to measure region, we need to enclose it with some circle, or in our case with ellipse. The official name of this figure, of this ellipse, is minimal volume enclosing ellipsoid. It's quite complicated task, and to solve it, we used Hachuyan algorithm. The distribution of the ellipses semi-axis, you can see, it's clearly that each distribution follows the exponential law, and you can see that each line each distribution line meets each other on the same place. It's located on the left side of the plot. The third task is creating artificial microstructure using a program for 3D modeling, Blender. We created this alloy, and we chose Blender because it has a big advantage. It provides Python API. So we used Python code to generate simple cubes. And then we created artificial alloy based on these cubes. The main idea is to analyze artificial alloy with given properties. In future, we maybe will need to validate our tools on microstructure which differ from our original samples. So we need there are two ways. We need to create some artificial samples, or we need to create new samples of tungsten carbide with cobalt, which is more expensive, and it's more expensive. The last task is extracting hidden features. In fact, every image contains two types of features. The first type is visible. Visible features we can actually see, such as object color, such as object class. Maybe it's a table, or there is a pen, or something like this. And these features we can see. And the second class of features is called hidden. It's hidden because they actually do not have any physical interpretation. No, so we can't measure it with classical. We can see it and understand what it is, but in fact, in some cases, these hidden features can describe object on the image better than do its visible features. To extract hidden features, we created neural network based on autoencoder architecture. We used 11 U-net blocks. We connected it sequentially, and during training, model is downsampling the original image into some features. We will call it feature vector, and then upsample it into original image. We chose U-net architecture because we choose this architecture because only U-net was able to solve this task efficiently. We also tried some VGG architecture and ResNet, but in fact they didn't provide any level of image upsampling. To extract hidden features, we took the output from the bottom block, and then we used some algorithms for dimension reduction. And you can see this. You can see on the plot. You can see feature vector for each image. For example, blue dots are the microstructure with a medium grain size, and the green dots are microstructure with a small grain size. In fact, points which relate to one class, such as blue, are close to each other. You can see there is some group, but in some cases it's not true. For example, pink group, a pink class formed two groups. It's not clearly why this happened, but it's interesting to look at correlations between classes. Also, there is some sources. So if you are interested in our project, you can read abstracts that we published a month ago, and also there is code. And to sum up, we proposed the procedure for extracting boundaries between tungsten carbide regions and cobalt regions. Then the angle distribution demonstrates two peaks. As I mentioned before, it's similar to bimodal Gaussian distribution, but in some places they differ. Also, semi-axis distribution of the enclosing ellipse. So enclosing ellipse follows the exponential law, and the neural network based on autoencoder model, especially UNet architecture, is able to extract hidden features from images efficiently. Also, there is one task is not mentioned. In future, we need to find the way how to find dependencies between all data we get from the image and data and mechanical properties of the LOE. Well, that's all. I'm glad to answer your questions if you have any of them.
Thank you, David. Let's thank the speaker. And if you have any questions or comments, it would be a good time to ask them to the speaker. Please.
Yes, I have one. My name is Yegor. Firstly, David, thank you for your presentation. So the question is, as far as I understood from your presentation, this algorithm, it highly depends on the quality of the image that you get. So the question is, do you do something like prepare procedures to prepare your image for such analysis, or it is not as important as I thought?
Okay. Yes, we provide some image processing, such as we use the median filter to make image more smoother. Especially this image processing is very important for this task for determining angles in cobalt regions. But for task for autoencoder model, we do not provide any image processing because it could we can lose some information because we change the image. So in task hidden feature extraction, we do not make any image processing, but for task determining angles in cobalt regions, yes, we do median filter, then also binarization, then Sobel filter, and that's all.
Okay, thank you.
So more questions, comments? We still have a few minutes for discussion. Well, I actually have one. So is it correct that you actually analyzed a certain batch of certain samples from basically one production facility? So in some sense, you have a set of samples which were prepared in the same way. If this is true, then would one expect, so how universal your results should be. So if I'm changing some samples with the same chemical composition, would the distribution still be bimodal? And if I'm changing the chemical composition, would that still hold, or will it be completely different?
I think yes, because the main structure of the tungsten carbide and cobalt alloy is based on tungsten and carbide. So if you change some, if you make a sample with a bigger amount of cobalt or smaller, the structure will change, but it's the changes will not affect on the bimodal distribution. But in fact, it's better to check this and to look, and it's a good idea to get new samples and check our tools on them, because maybe the information I gave now, maybe it's not true. So I think yes, it will not change. But in fact, I would like to test our tool.
Yeah. So then, as a comment, basically the main question for me, at least, is whether what you observe is a feature of that particular samples, of those particular samples, or is it something about alloys in general? Yeah, it would be really interesting to figure out. Any other questions to David? Well, then let's thank the speaker again. And we are running a little bit ahead of the schedule. So what I suggest is that we give the stage to the next speaker. And then if we still have time at the end of the session, we will return to the discussion, which I had to break up with Anastasia. And then we will still have time for this. So the next speaker of the session is going to be Ksenia Zagvozdina from HSE. And that's one more change of topic a bit. She's going to tell us something about exploring the accuracy of the Lattice-Boltzmann method for fluid flows. So Ksenia, please.
Yes, thank you very much for introducing me. Do you hear me properly?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah?
Loud and clear.
Great. Do you see the presentation?
Everything's in order.
Great. So here I will talk about Lattice-Boltzmann method applied to some known fundamental problem called QET flow, which we had solved by this method, and it has analytical solution, so we can easily compare the results we obtained with the analytical results. So we estimated the accuracy of this method because it is widely used.
Ksenia, I apologize for interrupting you. I'm not sure whether you're still wanted to be on the first slide.
Yeah.
Okay. Apologies.
Yeah, it's like I wanted. Yeah. So the method is widely used, but its reliability is very unclear, and so we simulated a wide range of Mach and Reynolds numbers and explored the limits of this method. So firstly, I want to talk about the Boltzmann equation. It's considered as a kind of convection diffusion equation. So the first two terms are a distribution function that is transferred, and the third term represents the forces that affects the speed with which the distribution function is transferred. So on the right side of this equation is the collision operator, which determines the local redistribution. But since it is very complex 2D integral over the velocity space as well as the spatial space, just space, we used a standard commonly used BGK operator that satisfies all the necessary conversation laws and the condition that the distribution function should locally approach equilibrium. And it sets the initial distribution to approach the equilibrium at an exponential rate, which is great for us. So, and the equilibrium distribution here is Maxwell distribution. So as you can see, this equation must be discretized in velocity space as well as physical space.
Apologies, Ksenia, you're still on the title slide.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see it like this?
Now it's velocity space discretization slide.
Now it is.
Yeah. D2Q5 and D2Q9. Oh yeah, and that's Boltzmann equation now.
Okay, yes, I will go back so everyone can see. This is the Boltzmann equation in classical terms with the big and strange collision operator on the right. And this is the commonly used BGK operator on the right, which we used because it's a great, because it has a great exponential rate of approaching the equilibrium. So the velocity space we discretized with forming a set that is denoted with D and Q, where D is the dimension of the physical space, and the Q is the number of discrete velocities. And the velocities are determined so that in one time step, the particle can go from its current position to the neighboring site. So we obtained, we obtained the result by using the lattice-Boltzmann equation. Yes, in this form. The lattice-Boltzmann equation looks like this, and this collision operator on the right side simulates the collision of the particles by redistributing them on the in the I direction. So the Fi is the distribution function of the I direction. This equation can be divided in two parts. First, we find the post-collision distribution function, and then we propagate it to the neighboring sites. We also obtained the results for different distribution functions, equilibrium distribution functions, which are decomposed in Hermite polynomials. Here, the Cs is the speed of the sound in this liquid in isothermal process. So the numerical solutions also were performed with different approaches to boundary conditions. First, of course, the periodic boundary conditions on the right and left side of the space. And then we introduced different methods for solid walls. So the first linkwise method is introduced so that the solid wall and the liquid, this interface is between the grid nodes. And the principle here is that if the particle hits the wall, it goes back to its previous position. And the wet node, as you can see, is introduced with the grid points being as close to the interface between solid wall and the liquid as possible. Here we first of all—
Something happened to the microphone.
Really?
Yeah, okay. Better now, so apologies.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for that. I think my internet connection went bad, but okay. If you can hear me now, I will repeat.
Yeah, just carry on. That's fine.
Okay. So the wet node method needs us to first calculate the density and then its distribution on the boundary. So as we can estimate, it is a little more time expensive. So we implemented these methods for QED flow with the incompressible liquid. So this problem has an analytical solution, so we can obtain the accuracy. And as a result, we can see on this slide that wet node method allows to solve this problem with a slightly smaller number of iterations, which is not what we expected. Numerical experience also showed that the stability of the linkwise method is with a relaxation time over 1/2, which is what the theory tells us. We also showed that adding new expansion terms in the equilibrium distribution doesn't affect the accuracy at all. So after that, we of course checked if this lattice-Boltzmann method satisfies the conservativity laws, and of course it does. So on this slide, you can see the comparison between the analytical solution and the numerical solution, and using the standard deviation. And the wet node and linkwise method provide the similar solutions, but if we go to solve the 3D problem, the wet node method is too difficult to implement. So nowadays, there are many open source frameworks for that implement lattice-Boltzmann method. Here in this study, we used the framework Palabas developed in C++, and all the input parameters are dimensionless. So here are some all the parameters can differ from our Python implementation. So the omega here is the relaxation frequency, which is just an inverse of relaxation time. And also the sizes of the area are dimensionless. The Palabas package allowed us to solve the problem with a higher accuracy. Despite this accuracy, we observed a very unexpected result, very unintended. Can you see the next slide? Yes. So here is this unintended result. We can see the inflow in the upper corners of the simulation area. And we noticed it when we investigated the satisfaction of conservativity laws. So the energy conservativity laws, the satisfaction of this law has been verified, but during calculations with time less than shown on the right slide, it was possible to notice a slight increase in density value. So we increased the simulation period. And here we can see the linear dependence of density, which is very apparent. So the volume of calculated area remains over time. Nevertheless, the mass increases. So we needed to solve this problem. And we used another boundary condition method called scored boundary conditions, which I also implemented in Palabas. And it is proposed in the paper mentioned at the bottom of the slide. This method was proposed back in 1993. It is just an extended version of a numerical distribution function on the interface, only on the interface, not inside of the space. It is commonly used for simulating the flow on the corners of the domain. But nevertheless, it cannot be used for complex geometries. So here we can see the comparison between local boundary condition and scored boundary condition. And as we can see, there is no inflow on the upper corners using scored boundary condition. So the result of this study was that we obtained the simulation results using different numbers of expansion terms in equilibrium distribution function, and there are no different in these results. We also obtained results using different boundary conditions, which accuracy-wise are also similar. We used Palabas and got better results accuracy-wise also, but we needed to use more expansion terms of equilibrium distribution on the boundaries to achieve the conservativity. So that's all. Thank you for attention. Thank you for inviting me. So I would gladly answer your questions.
Thanks, Ksenia. Let's thank the speaker. Actually, let's thank all speakers of the session. Now, any questions to the speaker? Questions, comments? Well, while the audience being shy, I actually have one. So with this violation of conservativity that you managed to fix in a two-dimensional flow,
yes,
would the same problem and the same solution apply to, say, a 3D flow, or something different will be needed?
We haven't tried to simulate anything with local boundary condition in a 3D, but as I can say from experience, I think it will be the case also in 3D. So the 3D problems are more difficult, of course, with boundary conditions, as well as just the implementation of another dimension. And there are different boundary methods for 3D problems than there are for 2D problems. So the local boundary condition doesn't apply there. So I think there is something else from Skorda's boundary condition that can be applied with the satisfaction of all the laws needed.
Something else is in it. Okay, yeah, thank you. Other questions to Ksenia? Well, if not, let's thank all speakers of this session, which now concludes. So we can, let's see, stopping the recording.